So you want to save money on development costs and you've heard of Lovable but don't know where to start? Well, I've been making tons of apps and features for my site with Lovable and I've saved over 6 figures worth of development costs, and I'm going to be giving my review of Lovable and I'm going to tell you all the tips and tricks on how I did it. Let's begin. Let's talk about what Lovable is. Lovable is an app where you can build software as a service applications. It's funny to think that if you had a time machine and you had access to Lovable, you could go back maybe 10, 12 years and get millions of dollars of funding for what you can simply type in or vibe code. Now I'm going to be talking about what vibe coding is. I'm literally vibe coding all day, like literally all day. I come into work, I vibe code. I do work and multitask. I vibe code all day using Lovable. I've used it quite a bit and I even built an app in about 100 hours. Now, you might be thinking, oh, well, you can just type in an app and then ship it and you're good to go. Well, not exactly. There's a couple reasons for this. Software is quite complex, and believe it or not, getting what you think is a good idea in your head to Lovable and to your customers is actually quite a bit of a process. Now, once you master this process, you're going to save a ton of time and a ton of money. And if you don't master this process, you'll be wasting your time, as I have in the past too. Now, a little bit about me. I started an e-learning company 14 years ago, and since then we've sold 9 million courses. And I'm using Lovable to make features for Mammoth Club all day long. It's a really awesome process and it's helping me serve my customers better. But there's a lot to talk about on how we get from A to B. So as I mentioned, Lovable is a software as a service generator. You need to first understand what software as a service is and how they are generally built. So let's talk about what a software as a service is. Now let's say you have a problem in life and you need to solve it with software. It could be accounting software, it could be a CRM, it can be a scheduling app. Basically, if you can solve a real life problem with software, that's software as a service. And you also need to know how they have been typically built. Usually you have a front end and a back end, and somewhere in the middle you have a payment processor as well, because of course you need to get paid. So if you're not a coder, you have to understand that there are different front end frameworks, and the one that Lovable uses is React Tailwind. And long story short, basically you can make really nice looking websites with React Tailwind and program it in a very easy way. Now, you also need a backend, and for the longest time, you could use something called Supabase. And I'm going to be talking about Supabase later as how I switched to it from a different backend as a service. But essentially, Supabase is what they call a backend as a service. It's really nice and I really like it. In fact, I use it for Mammoth Club today. One of the things I like about Supabase is that everything is just laid out perfectly for you, and it was a really good choice to pair the front end React Tailwind with the back end of Supabase. Now Lovable has a cloud option, which we'll be talking about later in this video. But basically what you could do is prompt what you want the website to look like, connect the back end, and basically make a software as a service. So if you had a really interesting problem or a really kind of niche problem in your life, you could just make a software as a service and then you could put it up on something like Product Hunt and then start selling it. And the best thing about software as a service is that you usually get monthly recurring revenue or annual recurring revenue, but you also just get recurring revenue, which is absolutely amazing because guess what? It recurs. So the more recurring revenue you have, the more of a multiple you can sell your business for. Sometimes businesses sell for 1 to 2x, but recurring revenue can sell for 5, 10, or if money is really loose, 25 times X sales. So Lovable's really awesome, but wait a second. If anybody can prompt it, does that mean that coders are going to go away? I don't think so. However, there's a lot of nuance to what that means. Using Lovable is actually quite easy. All you have to do is type in your idea. And by the way, if you're typing in something, don't just type in a sentence, maybe type in 2 or 3, or maybe even a paragraph. And sometimes what I do is I type my idea into ChatGPT first, and then I tell it, well, ChatGPT, to make a Lovable prompt, and then it does it for me. And I find that actually works out quite well. Side note, one of the things I find about vibe coding is you're constantly working in between different platforms. You're working between ChatGPT, Anthropic, Lovable, Cursor. You have to use all of them to get your products. You can't just really use one. You have to use them all. Some ones are better for others, and well, others are better for other things. And you'll find that out the more you do it. Again, as I said, I'm vibe coding all day. And if you don't know what vibe coding means, basically vibe coding means that you're using AI or LLMs to make apps. And while it's a really funny word, I view these LLMs as a tool, much like a spreadsheet or a word processor, rather than something like AI. One of the things that is definitely not true is just typing in a prompt and just having your app be built and then all of a sudden getting millions of dollars of recurring revenue. That is exactly how this process does not work. Again, since I've been programming for a long time, it's more or less just a tool that I have in my toolbox rather than a complete solution. So once you have your Lovable prompt, you can add in some screenshots, or you can even add some Figma designs. And once you push enter, it takes a little while, but eventually it just spins up with an entirely new app for you. And apparently a lot of people kind of stop here and they show off what they've done on Twitter, but believe it or not, getting from even this step to a workable app is a long process. So the best use of Lovable is probably building small snippets for a bigger project. And this is what I'm doing all the time. And even doing this takes tons and tons of prompts. It could take 50 or 100 prompts just to get a small widget for Mammoth Club online. And then I pass it off to my developers, which I'll be talking about later. But I want to talk about right now is an app I built from start to finish. So in the summer, I actually broke my wrist and I had to basically take some time off. And in that time, I decided to build a fully featured software as a service app with Lovable. And that software as a service was called PromptKeep. It was a place to keep your prompts. The idea was rather simple. We use prompts all the time at Mammoth Club to do whatever it is that we need to do, whether it's images or courses or coding snippets. It doesn't matter, but they're all scattered throughout Google Docs or Discord or whatever. And if I'm having this problem, a ton of other people are going to have this problem. So what I decided to do was basically make PromptKeep. Now I'm actually really proud of this app because the branding is just amazing, as in the logo is a castle within a shield and there's the generative AI stars above it. I think the branding on this is incredibly awesome and I'm super proud of it. This site actually took 100 hours to make. The reason why it took 100 hours is because LLMs and apps like Lovable, they tend to run in circles after a while. And what happens is that you tell it to do something and it might not do it for 5 or 6 prompts. So what you have to do in this case is you have to use the chat button. And the chat button will get the LLM to think about it. And once it thinks about it for a while, it will implement the plan, which is really awesome. And so this is something that I learned maybe 50 hours into this. Now I should mention it took me 3 weeks to build PromptKeep in about 100 hours. So let's call it 35 hours a week. I actually use the voice commands on my Apple laptop to prompt commands to build an app. I built the whole thing with voice. I actually didn't type anything because, well, one of my hands was incapacitated at the time. It was exactly like the holodeck on Star Trek. I can't believe that I actually did that I told the computer to do things with my voice and then it actually did it. Now it took 100 hours of this rather than, let's say, 30 seconds, but the point is that I could do it. Now there was no way that I could actually build PromptKeep in 100 hours just by coding it. There is absolutely no way. Like none. It would probably take 500, 1,000, maybe even 2,000 man hours to make this app. So one of the things that Lovable does is that it allows you to revert back. So if it makes a change, you can revert back. And as you're going through making an app, you might say, let's change the style, change the button colors, do this, do that, do that. And then all of a sudden you realize that for the last hour or two, what you had before was better. And this is an iterative process. And if you've ever built anything, you realize that it's an iterative process. And sometimes you can iterate down the wrong direction. And that's one of the reasons why it took 100 hours. I would tell it to do things and then it would do the wrong thing, or it would do the right thing, and then 2 hours later I realized that it was the wrong thing. I'm still solving problems like I would as an actual coder, but I'm solving them in a different way. The restore feature on Lovable is super useful. When I'm working with Anthropic or ChatGPT, they don't have that restore feature and I really miss it. So the other thing I had to do was get familiar with Supabase, and I was not familiar with it at all. And so I would basically tell Lovable to make Supabase functions and add Supabase functionality, and it would do it. And then I'd have to go into Supabase and just see what it was doing. And so there's also that went on. Now, the coolest thing is that once you build your app, you can put it up on Product Hunt, and I did that with PromptKeep, and I thought it was super cool. So just one more thing about design. One of the best things that I like to do is to basically find a style reference in Midjourney. And if you don't know what a style reference is, it's basically a reference where you can make other images with. So if you find a really good style reference, you can just use that style reference for your images. And all the images and all the marketing images was used with one style reference for PromptKeep. And then I tell Lovable to say, hey, look, make it the same colors as this. And it does it. It's really good. So that's a really good way to make all of your images and branding consistent. Now, I think this probably would have taken even longer if I wasn't a coder and I haven't built projects in the past, because since I've built so many projects, I kind of know what to tell it and what to do. And one of the things about Lovable, which I thought was really, really awesome, is I could just tell it to build a platform admin and it would do, let's call it 90% of the work in one prompt. And I think this is really where the speed happens. You can get 90% of the work done, maybe even 95% of the work done with just one prompt. And this is very familiar to how self-driving cars work. It's very easy to get to 80, 90, 95, 98, but those last 2 percentage points are arguably the most important, but are the hardest to get. And I think the same thing happens with Lovable. It's very easy to get a lot of the way, but to get all the way, it takes a lot more time. And I remember spending maybe at least an hour or two on just one problem, and eventually it worked. And so in these circumstances, you need to literally stop going into Lovable and you need to kind of look at the code. And you can even take that code and put it into Anthropic or ChatGPT. And you also need to figure out how all this stuff works. Now, since I know how React works, I can go and look at all the files. In fact, what you can do is you can say, chat, tell me which files are associated with specific functions. You can go look at the files, pull them into Anthropic or Cursor or ChatGPT and say, hey, look, this is the problem that Lovable's having. Fix it for me. And you can literally put that back into Lovable and then it might work. And sometimes, and this happens so often, where I'm looking at a problem and the problem is just really easy and it takes a human like 5 seconds to figure it out, but it will take the computer like 30 minutes. So these LLMs can do lots of really amazing stuff, but in other ways they are extremely inefficient and you have to kind of know how that works. And what's interesting is if you start to figure out how ChatGPT works, how Anthropic works, how Lovable works, how a lot of these different systems work, well, you can figure out the best way forward. And this is why I don't think that programmers are really going to go away, because you still need people to do this. Now, having said that, there are going to be fewer people to make the same amount of quality products, but what's going to happen is that the bar is going to be moved so that every product is going to be much higher quality. And in the end, I don't think it's really going to displace too many jobs, because software is complex, and if you raise software complexity, you're gonna need a lot more people to do it. And this comes from a person who has spent hundreds of hours with this stuff and has been basically coding since 1997. So as I mentioned before, I actually moved from a different backend all the way to Supabase. And the reason for this is that because Lovable used Supabase, I could basically make stuff in Lovable and then have my development team put them onto Mammoth Club, which I thought was really, really awesome. The problem was the original backend that we're using is Laravel, and Laravel, I'll probably never use it again. Not saying that it's bad. I think there's a lot of really good use cases for Laravel, but I just like Supabase a little bit better. And that pipeline of going from Lovable all the way to my site was greatly improved because I use the same framework. Now, this is a really big thing. If your software as a service or whatever it is that you're doing isn't React Tailwind in the front end, which Mammoth Club was because it's a really good framework, and it seems to be the standard framework that people are using. And this is, of course, cemented by Lovable, because Lovable, if it's using React Tailwind, more and more projects are going to be used on it. Anyway, Mammoth Club was using React Tailwind, so that was really easy to just set something up and design it and then have my developers implement it. Now, of course, there is a lot of things that you need to understand there. Just because you make something in React Tailwind doesn't mean it's going to just magically go on to the site. There are different kinds of variables and paradigms, and every software as a service is different, and Mammoth Club was no different. So I got a design document from my team and I said, hey, Lovable, make it in these specifications, and that made things pretty good. And within 24 hours, I could go from a concept in my brain all the way to my customers on Mammoth Club, which I think is really cool. One of the things I did was a new student dashboard. If you haven't taken an online course, you know that student dashboards are not very exciting. So I wanted to make a really exciting one. So I did in Lovable, and then they put everything up on the Mammoth Club. Now, of course, it was a little bit different, but for the most part, all the features were there. So one of the other features that I really like about Lovable is that you can connect to GitHub, and basically once you start vibe coding, it will automatically update everything for you in GitHub. And this is awesome because you can save your code and you can use it with another LLM, or you can do whatever you want with it. And I think this is really awesome, and it's a feature I hope that never goes away. It's always nice to have a GitHub account because you can basically show off all of your projects there. And not only that, you can always revert to a previous push if you don't like your progress. So as I mentioned, Lovable has Supabase functionality. However, it has its Lovable Cloud functionality as well. Should you use Supabase or should you use Lovable Cloud? Well, that's basically up to you. For me, I like using Supabase because I can take a widget that I make in Lovable and put it onto Mammoth Club, which all uses Supabase and React Tailwind. However, if you're just making a software as a service, Lovable Cloud might be better. One of the things that was actually really difficult to do is to get the ChatGPT API to work well with Lovable. In fact, this was a real problem. Now, I've built a lot of apps with Anthropic, and the previous way that I used to do this is I would go into Anthropic, build something out, give it to my team, and then my team would put it onto Mammoth Club. So this process was good, except there was a little bit of friction. Anthropic is great for some things, but not really good for others. Lovable does a really good job with the front end, but not a very good job with the ChatGPT API. What I would use Anthropic for is to get really good results out of that. And for whatever reason, I spent maybe 5 or 10 hours trying to get it to work, and then I just eventually gave up on it. Lovable Cloud does a lot better job with all of these AI features. Now, having said that, the last app I built in Lovable did a much better job with the ChatGPT API. Now, some of you might be thinking, what is the ChatGPT API? Well, basically, you can take ChatGPT functionality and put it into your app using an API key, and you have to store that API key in a very safe way. Now, Supabase does this, and of course, the Lovable Cloud does this, but I think the Lovable Cloud just uses their own AI system, and you can essentially just use it a lot more quickly. So if you just want to build an app and host everything with Lovable, I would suggest maybe Lovable Cloud. If you're using Lovable for a bigger project, I would go with Supabase. Of course, if the bigger project or the bigger app or the bigger software as a service that you're building doesn't use Supabase, there's going to have to be a lot of extra work. And so what I find is interesting is that if you're not on React Tailwind or Supabase, this process is going to be really hard. It's just like going from Anthropic to whatever it is you're going to do. There's going to be that friction. And if you're going to set up a workflow, then you have to make this workflow as frictionless as possible. It just makes sense. So if one feature takes 1 extra day to do, well, you add 10 features, that's 10 extra days. That is way too long. You always want to figure out your development stream as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Now, I really hope that Lovable doesn't get rid of Supabase, and it's looking a little bit iffy at this point because when you go to connect your cloud, it's very hard to connect Supabase. That's the #1 reason why I use it now. I use it to make features in Mammoth Club and have my team implement it on it. And if Supabase goes away, I might even cancel my subscription. I understand that Lovable just received $200 million of funding and they want everything in-house, but I'm basically not using that for that function. I'm using it for small snippets of a bigger app to make a bigger software as a service. And I think this is probably one of the best use cases for Lovable. And this is just the way that development is going to go in 2025 and beyond. It's going to be, you have people designing stuff, and then people interacting with LLMs, and then eventually people fixing the bugs that the LLMs make, which, no joke, is an actual job that you can do now. So Lovable is integral to my business, and I can't really imagine life without it. It's one of those things that I really wish I had years ago. And like I said earlier on in the video, if you had a time machine, you could probably just build a minimum viable product in Lovable and get millions of dollars of funding. But now, since everybody can do that, the quality has to go up, and you still have to put in your time to make a good quality app. So Lovable is really awesome, and if you haven't tried it, you should just go try it right now. I think it's really, really good. So I want to know your thoughts on Lovable. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you use Lovable? Do you not use Lovable? Are some of your other tools better? How do you get your apps out quickly? Post your workflow down below. I would be interested to talk about it. So please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you really like this content, you can subscribe to Mammoth Club. And in Mammoth Club, we have a lot of vibe coding, AI courses, and we also have courses on Lovable, as well as prompts and a bunch of other awesome stuff. It really does help us out when you subscribe. And if you are here for the Black Friday deal, we have a very special Black Friday deal, and the link is down below. And if you're past Black Friday, well, it's going to be pretty good. So I highly recommend that you subscribe to Mammoth Club. It's the best way to future-proof your skills. The world is reorganizing, and Mammoth Club teaches you all the relevant skills that you need to succeed in it. After all, we've sold 9 million courses since 2011. Also, we have business pricing, and the link for that is down below. If you need to upskill all of your employees, you can check it out with the link down below. We have tons of AI certifications where we take people from knowing nothing about AI to being complete masters. So whether you're an individual that needs to upskill with AI, or if you're a business that needs to upskill all of your employees, Mammoth Club has the solution for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.